car ownership across the world, unsurprisingly, the US is number one at 91.7%. Wait, that means that almost 1 out of every 10 people don't have a car? Well, I guess when considering the Northeast that has good transit, and then like really young people that don't have the means to get a car yet, maybe it's accurate. You can actually visibly see that New York City, Massachusetts, New Jersey, another big one, Illinois, probably because of Chicago. Yeah, their car ownership is a lot less compared to all the other blue states. This scale ranges from 4% to 35% with no car. Kind of funny, in the less populated states though, you do absolutely need a car. Like you need it. Then it's our neighbor to the north, Canada at 85.1. Again, I'm thinking Toronto helps bring those numbers down. And it's Germany at 87%. So that's kind of interesting because it's a European city. You can definitely, I feel like you can get around that continent without a car if you don't want. Obviously, it helps if you have one. The British at 84%. 84% of British people own a car. I don't know why I'm shocked by that a little. South Korea and Japan just above 80%. Now watch this drop off. Wow, Australia only at 78%. I would definitely think you would need a car in Australia just be able to run from the kangaroos. Israel at only 65%. Dang, China's only at a quarter. I know there's 1.4 billion people that live there, but wow. I did not think that percent. I thought it'd be closer to 50, and it's even lower for the most populated place on Earth, India. When comparing household car ownership numbers across worldwide, we realize that only 7.5% of Indians own a car. This is obviously far less than places in Europe and North America. Now, a lot of this might come down to just like preferred mode of transportation. Like a moped isn't a car, right? I don't think they're included mopeds or whatever you want to call them. What are they called? Better way to phrase this is probably just any two-wheeled vehicle. I'm seeing crazy percentages that 47% of Indians just use two-wheeled vehicles instead. Funny thing is, if this is accurate, India still has 105 million cars, and China has 325 million cars, which is more than the US. This is a proposed US map all the way back in 1973, where we reorganized the 50 US states to, first of all, only be 38 US states. Also, the borders are heavily altered. Love that you can still see the outline of the current US state borders. What's amazing about this is like just to see like map nerds like me existing back in the 70s. Obviously, map nerds have existed all throughout time, but crazy to see what he was thinking. Also, very different names for all these places. The Bayou, that's an interesting one. Talladega basically is just Alabama, but you do give Alabama more coastline. Piedmont, there's only one Carolina now. Appalachia, you still gave Michigan the up, huh? That's interesting. I don't think I would have done that. I'm sorry. No more Dakotas, it's just Dakota. Cascade out of Oregon and Washington. Again, I'm probably in the minority here when it comes to Californians, but I do think that we're completely two different states. Like Northern California and Southern California, they're two different things entirely. I don't think it's a good idea that we're just this big old massive state together. I actually like that the East Coast states are still smaller over here because overall, remember, population density, most Americans live on this side. So you do have to just, generally speaking, make these states smaller. They're just handling a lot more people this way. How crazy that New York would be. So they're pretty much just cutting New Jersey in half. Plymouth gets Boston. Interesting to see their capitals too. So Philadelphia, that's an interesting name. What is that? Susquehanna? The Ozarks, some Native American namings here with a Shawnee. I'm now just realizing we'd be in a state with Las Vegas. That's weird. That feels a little bit weird to me, not gonna lie. But in the 70s, Las Vegas was a very different place than it is now. Remember that back in those days, population numbers were very different. I mean, you're talking about cities being big with only 1 million population. Now we have so many cities with over 1 million population. In 2016, there was over 500 cities with over 1 million population, and we're estimating there's gonna be over 600 cities by 2030. I hate to break it to all the geography people like me, but we're never gonna do this. We're never gonna reorganize our states. It doesn't make any sense unless some sort of like crazy crisis goes on and forces us to do it. But I don't even know if we do it in a crisis scenario. These are some states from Grand Theft Auto. Okay, I don't know anything about Michigan, so pardon my ignorance, but if you're going to redraw boundaries, why would the Upper Peninsula stay with the lower state? That's what I'm saying. Michigan gets so mad at me for saying that though. Voter turnout by state in the 2020 presidential election. If you didn't know, more people voted in that election than ever in history. I'm actually curious if we're even going to get close to these numbers here in 2024 coming up. Obviously, 2020 was a very spicy year, so obviously the percentages are going to be lower in some of the more populated states. That should be kind of a given. California's the most populated state. Only 2/3 of our people voted though. I'm also curious to see if voter turnout is much lower in the less swing states. Obviously, California is not a swing state. That's not the case for Oregon and Washington. These are very blue states, over 70%. And on the contrary, Montana, a very red state, also over 70%. Nevada was kind of a swing state. They're at 61. Also Arizona at 70. Remember, this is how the Electoral College ended up looking like in 2020. The blue states voting for Biden, the red voting for Trump. They say Texas is a swing state. it's probably not. 63% voter turnout. Florida is, though, and that's only 62% turnout. Georgia famously going blue, but only a turnout of 66%. That is shocking. More than Alabama, but that's firmly red. Mississippi at 70%. Wow, I'm trying to make sense of this map, but I can't. Arkansas only at 54%. That's a red state, though. Ohio went red, only 70%. West Virginia also red, but really low numbers. How did New Jersey just dump? New Jersey's one of the top, whereas their neighbor, New York, didn't do that much. Obviously, again, New Jersey went blue. Does Maine see a higher turnout? Both Maine and Nebraska have a different system. Nebraska didn't particularly see huge numbers, even though, as you can see, they have like this, what is this called again? With like proportionate electoral votes. Wonder how much weather affects it too. Like, I know that there's like early voting, but a lot of people vote in person, but there's like certain bad weather on certain days, so less people went out to vote. Obviously, Washington, D.C. doesn't have a lot of people, and it's literally D.C., so they had the #1 voter turnout. But yeah, New Jersey at 78%. Then Minnesota, which was blue, Oregon blue, New Hampshire blue. A lot of these states very blue. The biggest red one was Montana. Funny that, so biggest turnout was really from states that were already going blue. Meanwhile, bottom 10 mostly red, which is interesting. Again, I don't think I can make sense of this. Nevada, the swing state with the lowest voter participation at 61%. Wisconsin has the highest of the swing states at 73%. Funny enough, even though we're criticizing these numbers, this is the best it's been in decades. Idea, national lottery. $1 goes to a fund for each person who votes. 140 million goes in. One voter gets all. Dang, I like the way this guy thinks. The most smoking countries in the world. And the US isn't even on this chart. It's estimated that currently just above 10% of US adults still smoke, which is obviously way down since the 1950s. For a lot of Americans, when traveling internationally, it's a bit jarring just to see how popular smoking truly is around the world. It's actually insane just how effective our anti-tobacco campaigns were. I mentioned just above 10% of US adults still smoke, but in Latvia, it's 29%, and this is the very bottom of the chart. Just above them, we have Czechia and Turkey, Greece, Tonga, East Timor. It's all hovering around 30%. Some more European countries like Montenegro and Hungary. Smoking also very big in Pacific Island nations. Tuvalu, 32.2%. There's Slovakia, Lebanon, and France. They have all the memes for smoking usually. Isn't this basically what they eat for breakfast? France just has a little over a third of their population that smokes. I should say people over the age of 15 years old. Obviously, we're not including like minors. Well, 15 is a minor in the US, but below, whatever below that is. Cyprus, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Solomon Islands, Jordan. We're now at 36%. In Indonesia, it's 37%. Croatia, Papua New Guinea, Bulgaria, Serbia. Serbia inching towards 40%. They're only second on the list behind the island nation of Nauru. Nauru with the incredible 44%. This is like old American percentage in the 1950s. We just saw how many Americans used to smoke back then. It was almost a majority. The poor nation of Nauru, they've dealt with so many health issues, as well as, not to mention their islands just being like resource mined. They've literally just been stripped of, well, pretty much just about everything. On top of all of that, this country is also considered to be the most obese place on earth, with the World Health Organization estimating 71% of their population is overweight. You wouldn't expect smoking and overweight to go hand in hand like that. I thought that's why the French stay so skinny, actually. Man, the more I look into Nauru, the more depressed I get, it seems. But what do? Do you ban it? Banning things doesn't always work. For example, were bikinis ever banned in your country? In the majority of Americas, no. But in 2 spots, yes. Both in Brazil and the United States in the 60s. You'd think we'd learn our lesson about banning things after the Prohibition era. The US banned alcohol and Americans all just said no. Like, we're just gonna go ahead and drink anyways and give the money to the mafia. It's funny because bikinis technically date back to the times of the Romans. And this claims they were either banned or heavily discouraged in countries like Spain, Portugal, Italy, France, Belgium, Australia, and the US for decades. A woman could be arrested or warranted for indecent exposure back in those days. To be fair, I don't think it was every single US state, but certainly some of them. A lot of this is coming from a religious place. In the 40s and 50s, public hostility towards the bikini was rampant. Truman even went so far as to nuke the Bikini Atoll. He despised this article of clothing so much he dropped a sun on it. Brazil really did a 180 on that one, huh? But yeah, like I said, it wasn't the US as a whole, but certain states, or specifically certain counties, seems bad for business. Business languages in Africa, and some of it is a bit more shocking than you'd expect. It doesn't just mirror colonization. Obviously, this continent was heavily carved up by the Europeans. What exactly is a business language? I mean, I get it's the language with the most economic power in certain parts of the world, but I just really don't like the terminology here. This does lead to an interesting conversation that I've been personally thinking about a lot lately. Not all forms of communication are economically equal. So I think about this a lot because I'm a content creator. If you were to make videos videos in your native language, let's just say Swahili, well, you would be paid significantly less in terms of ad rates. Part of the problem is there's only an estimated about 100 million people speaking that language. There's only 5 million that speak it as a first language, though. Compare that to a language like Japanese, for example. If you made your videos in Japanese, the chances are you'd be paid a lot more in terms of advertiser rates. It's very strange. And a big reason for that is just because Japan, where they speak Japanese, has the 3rd strongest economy in the world. So I'm definitely thinking about that when I read business languages in Africa. There's obviously way more factors that go into it than just that, but it's just something I've been thinking about a lot. A lot of this mirrors colonization, of course, because any country that was colonized by the British Empire, English is probably the top #1 business language in the world. That's why even European countries, they start learning English as a second language. It is the quintessential language of business, and no one even comes close. Maybe Mandarin of China, but remember, China speaks a lot more than just Mandarin. It's not like their 1.5 billion people are all speaking this language. The majority do, though, at 1.1 billion. So places like Mozambique and Angola, they were colonized by Portugal. Their business language is Portuguese. Funny enough, remember, there was a time where Imperial Germany also had colonial holdings in Africa. They lost all this stuff as a punishment for losing World War I, but you don't see these countries still using German as a business language, even though that is a pretty powerful business language. For the most part, it is just English and French. Equatorial Guinea has Spanish. That's because Equatorial Guinea was a Spanish colony for a long time there. I think where the map gets a little bit more interesting is in the north to see where Arabic is taking over. So Egypt was a British colony, Libya was an Italian colony, Algeria was a French colony, but according to this map, Arabic is a more economically powerful language in these countries. There's a couple places that share Arabic and French. I feel like we should have more countries in this, like, category of both. I feel like it would be Arabic and English in Egypt, Arabic maybe and French in Algeria, but you know what? Algeria doesn't have a whole lot of French speakers left. There's only about 11 million of them, which is only 33% of the country. Tunisia is Arabic and French. Madagascar was a French colony, but it's English and French here. Same thing for Cameroon. That was a former German holding too. Then there's Ethiopia as the only country with other on the map. It could be any one of these. And remember, Ethiopia fought heavily to not be colonized, famously fighting the Italians not once, but twice. Interesting that Italian is nowhere to be found on this continent. Speaking of losing things in the world wars, though, this is what Italy had to give to France as punishment for World War II. Small piece here, just north of Monaco. A couple of small bites in this region. Finally, the little St. Bernard Pass, and that's it. All in all, kind of funny. Kind of funny considering Germany literally got divided down the middle. Actually, it was even worse than that immediately after World War II. They got divided into 4 different pieces. Then there's Japan, which had 2 suns dropped on it. Not to mention they lost like more than half their territory from when they started. Then there's Italy, which famously, people say they weren't really punished. They were, but yeah, comparing to the other 2 big Axis members, yeah. Population 12. However, they didn't face any war crime tribunals. I guess their biggest punishment was just being memed on forever by the internet for not doing that great in World War II, which is honestly a pretty harsh punishment, not gonna lie. As always, big thanks to my patrons. Month 2 in Drew's basement. Drew's Argentinian Grandpa.
DOOCHBAGGINS.
Boys. I can't
Connor
sleep.
Pavlik.
KansasWasMentioned.
Amateur Archaeology.
aPhatNarwhal.
Carmel
Fredrik Tibblin.
InquisitorXarius.
KingBearHaze.
KirinoIsBestGirl.
LuxembourgLover.
Mgmluthegoat.
Tyrol.
Tambre.
Mexican 760.
ZaneyBoi.
Like your name here, check that link to Patreon down below.